Folks, what do you get when Jordan Peterson gets into a room surrounded by 20 atheists? I'll tell you what you get. Well, at least our channel gets a video, a little bit of an impromptu video anyway. You can tell it's impromptu because I don't have my baseball cap on that everybody seems to love. And quite honestly, my hair is getting significantly longer. Possibly I need to cut that. I don't know, but I'm enjoying it while it's long. So, you can let me know in the comments section if you like my hair the way it is, completely unstyled and curling up. That's just how it's going to be. Anyway, I saw this video not too long ago. I enjoyed it. It was interesting. I mean, Jordan Peterson sitting in a Jubilee video. The moment I saw his face on it, I thought of myself, this is a really bad idea to put him around 20 atheists, especially in this kind of format, because like Jordan Peterson, don't like Jordan Peterson, or whether you think he's a Christian, whether you don't think he's a Christian, whatever you think about him, his style of articulation takes 3 hours, right? Like he's better in a one-on-one conversation with someone where he can, go into like the pontificate. I mean, there's a lot there, and he has more and more that he keeps adding to the conversation, which is fascinating, but it's not conducive to a debate. So I don't know who scheduled this or why they scheduled it specifically with him being the defender of Christianity. You can tell the atheists surrounding him are not appreciative of the fact that he's the one who's defending Christianity because they're a little more literalist, and Jordan Peterson is anything but that kind of a literalist. So it causes some significant tension between everybody. Quite honestly, if it was me, I would have maybe contacted like a William Lane Craig or somebody like that who is more versed in straight up debate and also is a stronger Christian witness. But I can understand why there's some frustration from some of the atheists, and maybe they feel like they were promised a Christian or a fundamentalist Christian or something like that, and they end up with somebody who tells them, well, he may or may not be a Christian. So it makes it more difficult to debate. It's harder for all the things that you prepped. I understand that side of it. At the same time, I also feel like Jordan Peterson, again, this is not his thing. This is not really a video where he is going to be meant to shine in, because 5 minutes is not enough time for him to unpack all the things he's trying to unpack, because these people are starting on fundamentally different, not just different grounds, like different universes and what they think. So you get all this lack of clash, I'd say, and a lot of kind of unanswered questions. That being said, and maybe it's just the format of these kinds of videos, I've seen this more and more. A lot of the people I felt coming up to Jordan Peterson were very bad faith, and maybe that's the point. Maybe you're supposed to be a debater and you're not there to get your mind changed. I understand that, but they just seemed like it was hard to like them. I'll put it that way. If it's hard to like you, it's going to be hard for people to, you know, believe in what you're purporting they should believe in. Being a generally nice person and a kind person, again, this is why I always point to Graham Oppie in these kind of scenarios as the model atheist. That's somebody who has the logic and has the facts to support what he's saying, but also a genuinely kind person. Unfortunately, what this looked like a lot was kind of circa 2000, the new atheist movement, where you had a lot of young people who really were lashing out against Christianity, but a specific kind of Christianity, more fundamentalist Christianity. And they had good arguments against fundamentalist Christianity, but you can tell they did not really do their research on other Christian thought and how diverse it is, and how, if honestly you move your argumentation just a little bit and realize there's a lot of other Christians who don't accept those initial presuppositions that you think all Christians have to believe in. And I think this was a good example of that, this conversation that Jordan Peterson had with this specific atheist. So I wanted to just break this down a little bit and see where we may have gotten lost in the weeds, and how maybe it would have been better. Someone could have possibly better answered some of these questions, or at least done a little bit of a better job than maybe what Jordan did here. So without further ado, let's jump into this and take a look. By the way, I have to give an explicit warning. There is some explicit language used in here, so you have been warned. But on to the video.
My final claim is that atheists accept Christian morality, but deny the religion's foundational stories. Hi there.
It's very nice to meet you.
What's your name?
I'm Ian.
Hi, Ian.
Yes. So God says that you can own people as property. He says that you can beat them with a rod too. He commands genocide in Deuteronomy, in Numbers, and in Samuel. I mean, they have a goddamn baby barbecue in Numbers. Like, is all of this in line with Christian ethics?
Okay, before Jordan answers here, and I've had a chance to go over this video a couple times to think about, this is really the toughest, I guess, composition of questions that can be thrown at you right away. And part of that is the audacity of the claim there is going to warrant an atheist to make these kind of claims, to make you be consistent with that, right? If you say that atheists use Christian morality and they just don't know it, or they're not grounded in any form of their own reality, they're borrowing from the Christian faith, then the most natural place for them to go, so I don't begrudge anybody for doing this, is, oh, does the Bible comport, itself with the morality that you are espousing, right? Christians espouse morality that's anti-slavery, anti-genocide, love thy neighbor, which comes from the New Testament. Does the whole of the Bible comport with that? Can we prove that the Bible commands things like genocide? And they point to 1 Samuel 15, verse 3 and down, and they go to the command against the Canaanites, the slaughtering of the Canaanites. He brought up Numbers, which is, I think, Numbers 31 there, which these are tough verses. Of course, you have the slavery context and all that. Now, I don't remember how Jordan answers this, but what I probably would start with is this. And I'd probably say, I don't want to be condescending, but I'd ask, are you a fundamentalist, or did you come out of a fundamentalist background, right? Are you a Christian fundamentalist? And the person would probably look back at me and say, no, I'm not a Christian fundamentalist. Obviously, I'm an atheist. But they probably came out of a fundamental background. And once they said they weren't a Christian fundamentalist, I'd probably say, well, then why are you assuming that every Christian is a Christian fundamentalist, right? Let's just look at genocide specifically. If we're looking at the genocide claims in the Bible, there are, at least to my count, 4 major perspectives you can take on the genocide accounts in the Bible, and only one of them really would have to defend the idea that God really commands the killing of women and children, or non-combatants, right? That's divine command theory, which someone like William Lane Craig does hold to a divine command theory, but that's just one of the perspectives. In my opinion, even though you can strawman divine command theory, there's a little more strength to that theory than just dismissing it out of hand. I do think that's the weakest of the interpretive models. But right off the bat, before we get into the other ones, I'd say, so therefore, just because a sect of Christians believes that those texts need to be taken specifically as wooden literally as you have taken them, that doesn't mean that Christianity as a whole takes them that way. In fact, there's plenty of Christians, even more conservative ones, who would move a step over from divine command theory, like Paul Copan or Gavin Ortlund, who would say these texts are war rhetoric, right? They're explaining things in really big and graphic terms, but that's what they did back in the time. The haram, right? The total destruction of a entire society meant complete destruction, and they used these big, haughty, lofty terms. But when you look at the Egyptians, when they say we went into Israel and we completely destroyed the seed of Israel, Israel is no more, they're wiped off the face of the earth. And then you look at the historical record and realize that's not true. Israel is still there. They're still doing better than ever, honestly. What Egypt means is we won a war against them. And then the rhetoric that they write down is that it was a complete victory of killing everybody in the land, when in actuality they just killed the soldiers in a good victory for them, right? So that's a position that you can take. And Paul Copan has defended his belief of that when it says, or Gavin Ortlund as well, when it says women and children, that's meant to be taken more not metaphorically, but more allegorically, as lofty language, but not really referring to actually doing that. But then you can go down the other route with people like Jimmy Akin defend that these are texts that are written hundreds of years after the fact. And the intention of them was not to convey a literal history. In fact, the intention was to convey when the children of Israel are in Babylon and they're exiled to Babylon because they allowed themselves to be influenced by pagans and they started worshiping pagan gods, and God judges them for that. That their way of kind of reconciling that after the fact is they write up these narratives to explain what we should have done in the land, right? We should have cut everyone off. We shouldn't have allowed these pagan gods and pagan worshipers to continue in the land that influenced us. Then we got judged by God. So in that context, you don't even have to worry about what's being said because it never really happened that way. And that's not even a liberal position. There's plenty of faithful conservatives who would hold to something like that. And of course, support for that could be that when it says destroy all the Canaanites and it says we did destroy all the Canaanites, you realize in the Old Testament, you'll continue reading, and then there's God making commands to say, don't intermarry with Canaanites. Well, how can you intermarry with Canaanites if there are no Canaanites, if we completely destroyed them in a genocide? But of course, they didn't do that, in which case theory 3 there may have some support. Or you can go the complete Randall Rouser route and say, or even the Brian Zahn route and say, these are texts written after the fact. This isn't at all what God said. This is people putting words in God's mouth. That's more of a more liberal understanding of it. And yet there are 3 legitimate perspectives, or at least 3 perspectives over this side that have nothing to do with divine command theory. So just the starting of this question makes me think that this person is going to argue specifically fundamentally, which I think shows maybe there's a lack of knowledge in the other options you can take. I mean, it'd be like me going to an atheist and being really firm on something that if I would have done my research, I would have realized many atheists don't have to believe that, right? Like if I said all atheists are nihilists because they have no purpose and no morality, right? And I made that claim. Some atheists could look at me and say, there's plenty of atheists who have different groundings to not be nihilists, right? Or not be moral relativists, and they ground their morality in some form of Kantian ethics or utilitarianism or whatever, right? That would just show my ignorance and trying to make a sweeping claim about atheism and realizing, okay, no, there are an atheist who has studied it would rightly humble me and say there are plenty of other perspectives. And this is, I guess, maybe this is where atheists and Christians, if there's any atheists watching this, can maybe respect one another a little bit. And that is maybe respect each other when we're making arguments towards one another and not assume something about the other side. The other side may be a fundamentalist, but you need to ask that before you assume that they accept all these texts literally, right? They may not. You may have more agreement than you think you do. So on the offset, let's see how Jordan answers this. But this is a difficult question.
No.
So then God doesn't fit within Christian ethics.
Well, the biblical library is a continuing story, and everything written in it has to be contextualized by the entire text. There's 65,000 hyperlinks in the biblical text. And you can take pieces of it out of context and criticize them, and that's what you're doing. But that's a mistake. I think it's an analytic mistake because you're putting the cart before the horse.
I really don't think so. I think that if we say that something is Christian ethics, then I think that all of the books essential to Christianity would fit with it, especially if it's like the main character. When we're talking about
how do you deal with
God,
the morality of war?
So
how do you think you should deal with the morality of war?
Sure. Because I feel like the morality, like I feel like Christian ethics, like this is kind of, I guess I just think it's like kind of an absurdity to say that God doesn't fit within Christian ethics, but sure, well, we can go on my ethics. That's
okay. So that again, the problem with that, as we just explained, is this is assuming a specific position that you have to take, right? Which is the fundamental wooden literal version of this, which is probably, I'm not going to assume something about someone else. I would assume, though, well, I just said I'm not going to. I'm going to now. All right. If you force me to assume, I would assume that this gentleman probably grew up in a fundamentalist context where he was told all of this is legitimately like it says. There's no iteration, variation at all. But that's just not the case, right? It's just not the case that the Bible is far more complex than that. And to say that, God doesn't fit within the morality of the Bible, from what standpoint, right? That's arguing basically that everything is exactly what it looks like. Well, not even what it looks like, but what you think it looks like on the text, or what the Western understanding is of it. But it's not a new accretion in the Christian faith to say some of these older texts that seem to have what we would consider atrocities in them, or at least going against the love ethic of God, who is all loving, posed a problem to even ancient Christians. Goodness, Origen basically spiritualized a lot of these Old Testament texts and said, yeah, this doesn't really conform with the love of God. So this is not a new thing. There have been plenty of Christians all throughout history who have grappled with how to deal with this stuff. And there's a legitimate tradition. There's at least four ways of looking at this, as we just discussed, that have good roots and good groundings in the ancient Christianity. It's not just a modern idea. So to say that God doesn't comport, maybe he doesn't under a fundamentalist context, but again, the assumption that all Christians have to think this specific way is just wrong. Even if you can even go to Christians that other Christians may not consider are Christians, the progressive Christians, but in the progressive Christian line of things, they'll have a lot more agreement with this gentleman here. So there's many different ways of being a Christian. And I'm not saying where the cutoff line is. We haven't gotten into that yet. One of these days I might, but there's many views inside of that, not just this specific one. So again, the charge there is a little strange to me.
Totally fine.
I don't know what you mean by an absurdity. What game are you playing with?
Well, I just think that it's an absurdity to say that the Christian God doesn't fit within Christian ethics, that like the Christian God isn't like Christian ethical. I said that the specific statements that you made don't take the context of the stories into account, and so that your analytical approach is faulty. Sure.
Don't put words in my mouth.
Sure, then let's go through the example. Yeah, so, and I apologize. So let's go through the example. So in 1 Samuel 15:3, God says, go and slaughter the Amalekites, slaughter the men, the women, the children, the infants. What's the justification for that? Is that in line with Christian ethics?
That's a good question. I don't.
So let's just answer that. What if I come down and say, no, that's not in line with Christian ethics? Does that explode the Christian enterprise? No, it doesn't. All that does is say that what we're looking at in that specific text may not be able to be interpreted in the specific literal context that you just have framed. That's all it is. Or it's more nuanced than that. And again, you can go the Paul Copan, Gavin Ortlund route and say, kill the men, women, children, infants. It's not literal language. It's not referring to actually doing that. Well, you could say that's not fair. It is actually, you could say, no, it is literal language, and you're just conveniently trying to twist it up because you're uncomfortable with it. Okay, but make a different argument. That's a different argument, right? That argument's not being made. The argument that's being made is the only way to understand these specific texts is in the wooden literal context that God actually did command this, and it actually meant to kill men, women, children, non-combatants, and then this command was followed through. Well, and you wouldn't even have to go that far. You just have to prove that God did say it and wanted this to happen, right? But that requires a little bit of justification to that, right? Again, the literal, it's an abuse of the Bible. The fundamentalists abuse the Bible, I feel, and fundamental atheists, when they're arguing against it, are also not taking into context the context of the Bible. They are also abusing it. I mean, it'd be like if an atheist came to me and said, oh, the book of Psalms where it says that David cried so much that he made his bed into a pool that he swam in, right? That's ridiculous. Humans cannot cry enough tears to make their beds into a place where they could actually swim in the tears. So the Bible is illegitimate because it's teaching things that are false. I'd say, you have missed the point of the book of Psalms. The book of Psalms has nothing to do with any form of literal understanding. It's poetic. It talks to the soul. It's artistic. It uses beautiful metaphors in a way to get to a fundamental reality, but the language should not be taken literally. Same a lot with some parts of the book of Genesis, right? When they try and pin Christians down and say it has to be this. No, it doesn't have to be that. There are many ways to interpret the genre we're looking at, and we need to know what the book of the Bible is that we're looking at and how we should interpret it, and if there's any other ways to interpret it. And indeed there are, and there's a proud history of Christians interpreting things different ways. So again, it's a little bit frustrating. And again, Jordan Peterson is not the person you really want articulating this, because he's not someone who's been in the world of Christianity to address this kind of stuff. And also he's talking on a different wavelength than the gentleman over here is talking on. So again, it's a little frustrating though.
Really know what to do with the terrible, blood-soaked, saturated history of the human past. I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows. I mean, what you try to do in your own life, as far as I can tell, is to conduct yourself in a manner that makes such things much more unlikely.
I totally agree.
We're all saddled with the problem of the catastrophes that got us here, aren't we?
Yeah, but this one was commanded by God. That's the problem.
Yeah,
That's
well,
what differentiates it from anything else, is that this one, it's God saying, go and do this atrocity.
Do you think that there's ever such a thing as a righteous war?
I'm skeptical. I'm not sure. It would probably be situational.
Well, right. Fair enough.
But this one certainly wasn't a just war. The context for the Amalekite slaughter is that 400 years earlier, they fought one battle, which they lost. And God says, that's it. I'm going to wipe them off the face of the goddamn earth. And then 400 years later, he commands the Israelites to genocide their great grandchildren. That's not a just war at all. And also, a genocide is not a war.
Well, a genocide can.
Well, again, there's no need to even defend this, because even if you hold to divine command theory, all you have to do is to prove that there's another legitimate stream of Christians who reject the ideas that are being put forward here and say, no, God didn't command this kind of stuff. So God still is comporting with the morality that we've already discussed. And there's another legitimate way of reading the Bible. That's all you have to do. All you have to do is prove another orthodox perspective that skirts this objection. And there are three other ones. If Jordan Peterson knew them, he could bring them up. But again, this is you shouldn't have put, this is just not the right, whatever. I mean, whatever. But again, it is frustrating. I hope if there's atheists in here, please hear my heart on this. I hope you can understand this. I think that you could probably relate. Look, you've probably talked to a Christian before who has put you into a box and has assumed things about you. And you've been like, goodness, I don't believe any of these things. And to act like that's the only way to be an atheist is ridiculous. Well, this is a lot, I guess, maybe you can understand the burden of other Christians when they hear this kind of stuff from atheists, making broad assumptions that the only way to be a Christian is to believe these specific things. These are not the only ways. There are many other options. So, okay. But I've said enough on that. Let's hear more of what they have to say here.
Can be a war, but
absolutely not.
Look,
the genociding of the Amalekites, the men, the women, and the infants, that's not a war. The infants aren't combatants.
Look, I already said that it's very difficult to look at the blood-soaked past and to know exactly what to do about it. The answer I gave to the gentleman who is sitting here before you is that it's necessary to read a text like the Bible at all of its levels of analysis simultaneously. And there's a directional morality that emerges across time that has its roots in the Old Testament, for example, with its restrictions against murder specifically, that makes itself manifest in the Christian texts as the insistence on voluntary self-sacrifice as the foundational belief. That's a profoundly anti-violence ethos.
Do you have the belief in your theology?
Well, what do you think of that? Wait a sec. Now, redress what I just said.
So I'm about to address it, but I'm addressing it with a question. Do you think that God is by his very essence perfect?
You'll have to provide more.
Yeah, I would say yes for that.
Sure, just like maximally great in all like the great making qualities.
Sure.
Yeah, like flawless. Yeah. So does a flawless thing change? Does a flawless thing reveal like more and better information over time? Or would a flawless thing say, here's what's good, here is the absolute good thing to do at all circumstances in time?
Well, we know some.
Well, okay, so it depends on what you mean by that. So if we're going to the slavery argument, which is normally where this is made, so the idea is if God is perfect, right, and slavery is immoral, then why does God give us stipulations in the Old Testament of how to keep slaves, right, and how to tend to slaves, right? Slavery is immoral. He should just command right off the rip, we are not going to have any sanctions. We are not going to have, any process in this. Slavery's bad. Owning people is bad. Get rid of it. I don't condone it, right? That's an argument that's made. It's a fair argument. I understand it. But here's the thing, to say that an all perfect God would never put in place processes to eliminate something that is immoral, I think misunderstands the cultural context. It misunderstands humans, and it misunderstands the relationship between humans and God. If I were in a ultimately wicked society, let's say I went to a tribal land where their form of morality was anyone they didn't like, any outsiders that came in, they would kill, right? And the justification is that the outsider has crossed into their territory and they can kill him, right? So they have a judge and they have a jury, they have a legal system set up, but the legal system's all a sham, because we all know intuitively to put someone on trial for their life because they trespassed into your property is immoral, right? You can't kill someone who has done that minor of an infraction. But it doesn't matter. That's their justice system. And I come in as a missionary and I'm doing my best to work with that justice system. I can't get rid of it because I don't have that kind of power, right? If I say maybe they're listening to me, maybe they respect me a little bit, but they don't really respect me enough to say we're getting rid of this whole enterprise. But I want to move away from this evil injustice of killing people who have trespassed onto your property. And if I give up on this, they're just going to keep doing this practice, right? No one's going to move the needle. So what I do is I say, look, you cannot kill this person, but I don't know, maybe cut off their arm. All right. That is still grossly evil. We all understand it's grossly evil. And yet it's better than killing the person, right? And they're not going to accept, the evil society will not accept no punishment at all. And that may be the lesser form of punishment that they will accept, right? Maybe I could say cut off an arm and a leg, right? And they'll say, okay, yeah, we'll do that. But I'm trying to get them down to the lesser form of punishment they will accept, which is maybe taking an arm. That's all they'll accept, as they, there's nothing less I can do, right? I can't say take a toe, take a finger. They want an arm, right? That's the minimal amount they'll accept. Is it wrong of me to try and work in that society? Yes, it's evil to do that to a person who's done that, but it's more evil to kill them, right? So is it better for us to work within that society, get the lightest sentence, and try and build trust and continuously work with the society to move them to a place that down the road, nobody is punished for this? But we can't give up. If we give up and say this is unrighteous, I'm not even going to try and compromise, then everybody continues to die and you're not helping anyone. But you can help people along the way and you can move the society. And that's generally the argument, right? The all good God is working with humans, where if he looks at them and says, that's it, no slavery, they'll just walk away. And it's too hard of a teaching for them. They just walk away from him. And now what happens is any slaves that they would have had are treated way worse than they could have been, right? So the argumentation is this is something that's going to happen. If it's going to happen, it needs to be controlled. Here's standards to treat your servants and slaves more humanely. Again, there's different forms of slavery as well, but the argumentation generally is made, the Bible was never in favor of this. God was never in favor of this. He always wanted to move on from this, and yet he's working with a society that the way it is. He has to put in implementation processes to eliminate it. Now, you may say that's not fair. That's not true either. You could say there's parts in the Bible that support this, and there's an argument to be made. But the point is, under that context, then yes, it is possible to have a perfect God who doesn't necessarily lay down the law as his perfect standard. There's many of perfect things that I guess God would want us to do that he doesn't necessarily burden us with right off the gate, because we're innately sinful. And if he wants to move us from where we are to where we should be, sometimes you have to work within the sinful society that's there, right? And also the cultural context back in the day that he's working with. So that is an answer. By the way, apologies for my voice today. It is horsed, but we're going to try and move our way through this. But yes, I'd say that is a fair way of looking at those texts.
Some of that.
Wait,
Tell
so
the truth. That's one.
that's totally fine, but
No,
presumably
no. You don't get to skate over
because
that.
this is a
With
straw man.
that's totally
It's
fine.
a straw man of my position. It's a straw man of the argument. So
In what
the
way?
argument
No,
is
wait,
that God,
wait a sec. You
Well, I'm
said
already waiting a sec.
find one maxim that's transcendent across situations.
I didn't
and
say
I
any
just
of
did.
those words. I'm not sure what
Okay,
conversation you're
rephrase.
a part of.
Don't be a smartass.
I'm sorry.
Seriously, I mean it. If we're going to have a serious conversation, conduct yourself properly.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so let's just talk about tone real quick. I think both parties could do a little bit better job here. Okay, so Jordan has a bit of more of an aggressive posture, which again, I understand why everybody has come into this conversation this way. It's been set up in a way you only have a minimal amount of time. You need to get your points out quickly or people vote you off the show. That is not a conducive environment to people being cordial with one another. And the guy who's sitting there is surrounded by 20 what he doesn't know are probably hostile people. So he needs to be more aggressive. And the person who comes up to talk to him wants to get their points out, doesn't want to be run over like they can be by the host. So I understand that. But slightly the problem here is Jordan does kind of have that aggressive posture here. And unfortunately, man, I can't remember his name. Is his name Danny? Maybe is that what he said? I'm not going to assume. The gentleman over here who's representing atheism has what I would call kind of a condescending tone, right? Anytime, and maybe he doesn't mean to be this way, but this is where a lot of us can be better, right? We may not mean to come across a certain way, but if we are coming across that way, then the onus is on us to correct it. But to talk like this, well, yeah, the understanding of the thing, and always running your words together, like, yeah, but the understand God is over here and God is doing this thing, and like generally when you do that, it tends to show to other people you're being condescending towards them. And that brings out the more aggressive posture from your interlocutor. And of course, when you make some of these snide comments, like, I don't know what kind of conversation you're having, that just goes back to reinforce that. So if you want to have a productive dialogue with someone, being as charitable back and forth to them as possible is going to be a good thing. And also having good social cues. You may not think you're being insensitive or interrupting, but if you can notice when it looks like someone's becoming more aggressive, you should go back and look at yourself and go, am I interrupting more than I should be? Am I acting more condescending than I should be? Am I laughing at things I shouldn't be laughing at? Am I alienating this person? For Christians, we need to know this. If you want to win people, and for anyone, by the way, if you want to win people to your side, you need to be nice, right? You're going to win a lot more flies with honey than vinegar, and winning a debate means nothing. Win all the debates you want, it means absolutely nothing. People don't change their minds because of debates. They change their minds because they see good, decent people who are following principles, who are loving, who are kind, and they say, goodness, I want to be like that. That's how people change. So again, however, it is kind of fun to watch Jordan Peterson get into his professor context. You can tell Jordan has done this with many different students before. I kind of thought he would get kind of run over by these people, but then I forgot, he's been an academic professor and probably has had to deal with people who have been a bit snippy with him. So it is kind of fun to watch that.
Rephrase your question so that, because I must have missed it. I tried to answer it.
So in my mind, I guess by my lights, a perfect being doesn't change. A perfect being, if they're maximally good, maximally moral.
Does our understanding of the perfect being change?
Our understanding might, but
okay, how do we
distinguish?
Well, I agree. How do we distinguish between that, though, at the human level?
How do we distinguish between
our transforming understanding of perfection and perfection itself?
Between our
we can only see through our own lenses.
Presumably, a perfect being would be revealing all of these aspects all the time, especially if God's outside of time. I don't know how a God who's outside of time is revealing different things at different times. That just seems like incoherent to me.
Well, it depends. It depends on if he's dealing with imperfect beings. If a perfect being is dealing with imperfect beings, then yes, he may be revealing different things all throughout time. And again, that's going to help you very much in the genocide argument, but I've already said, set that aside because there's plenty of argumentation that says he never did command that, or not the way you're thinking. But regardless, if we're looking at the slavery issue, it is a good defense to say, yes, there's a process of God revealing parts of his perfection to fallen people to move them further. And you would expect to see the Christian conscience continuously improving as he's able to reveal more and more of that. So I don't understand where this objection is coming from.
Imagine something that's perfect
Sure.
and complete.
Sure.
Okay, and it's trying to communicate with creatures who are anything but that.
Sure.
Well, they're going to get it wrong.
Sure.
Okay, now wait a sec. Do you blame that on the interpreters or the phenomena itself?
So
like, for example, are you perfect in attending to your conscience?
Hold on. At the point in time when God is literally the one who created us, he could have created us in a way where we would always be receptive to these principles, where we don't have to go across like a learning curve where, maybe we'll understand like thousands of years in the future, maybe we'll do it. Oh, also, if you believe in an all-knowing God, then free will is impossible because
wait a sec. Let's not go to that yet.
You threw free will into the mix.
Well, that was the answer to your question.
Yeah, and
you said, why wouldn't God? Well,
it's
1,000 years of deep thinking philosophers would disagree with you. But
and 1,000 years of, or at least like the last 50 years of philosophers would disagree with you. These analytic philosophers.
Okay, so what's the point in that statement there? Right. So Jordan says 1,000 years of philosophers will disagree with you, and that's kind of an appeal to the long tradition of philosophers who are justifying God's foreknowledge and free will. And then he says, yeah, well, 50 years of modern philosophers will disagree with you. A good argument would be kind of responding back. It doesn't matter what 1,000 years of philosophers say. 1,000 years of philosophers can be wrong. But he seems to substantiate that the philosophers have legitimacy, but he turns to the last 50 years, which seems strange to me. Like 1,000 years of philosophers has much more philosophers and much more experience than 50 years of philosophers, unless his claim is that kind of a more, I'm not going to say bigoted, but it's a bit of a bigoted claim to say that modern philosophers the last 50 years are way smarter than the last 1,000 years, right? Basically, those kind of rubes and cornpones back in the day who didn't know anything, and all of our modern 50 years of philosophy and now knows everything. I kind of consider that to be a little bit of a strange argument, but I don't know what the point is for that. However, again, I feel like we're dealing with someone, or at least argumentation that is very simplistic, because he's making the argument against free will, and he's saying, you can't have free will if you have a God who has full foreknowledge. Okay, well, let's grant that applies. It certainly applies to the Calvinists. Let's grant it applies to the Arminian and the Molinist and all the people who want to define God as having supreme foreknowledge in that perspective. Again, this is assuming a specific theory of time, though. He is assuming that the A theory of time, which is the idea that time, when it was created, past, present, and future, all exists, right? So God can go into the future, into the past, whatever, because he's outside of time. That's an assumption, though. There's another view of time called the B theory, which means there is no future because it hasn't happened yet. There is still a future yet to be unfolding. And you have people who would affirm this, the open theists, the people who believe in dynamic omniscience. Richard Swinburne is a good example of an open theist who believes in what I would assume God, there being possible options in the future, right? God still has all knowledge because he knows everything there is to know. He just doesn't know the future in this model because there is no future to know. So it's not contradictory. It's like saying, well, can God make a square circle? No, he can't make a square circle because by definition, a circle can't have four sides. Well, it's not a limit on God's power to not know a future that doesn't exist. And there's no way to know it. So again, whether you believe that or not, there is a stream of Christians who believe that. So he is arguing, again, specifically only against one stream. Now, it may be the majority stream, but again, to not acknowledge that there's other Christians who believe in a different way, I think is a little bit disingenuous towards this conversation. Again, it's putting people into a box. However, I don't even think I would agree that the Molinist cannot defend against the charge that he is putting up here, that foreknowledge and free will are incompatible. The Molinists have tried to make those compatible for a while through middle knowledge, through subjunctive conditionals, and William Lane Craig defends that. again, so there, or there's other ideas even in the Thomas Aquinas model outside of those soteriological systems to define God and time. There's many ways of interpreting this. So this flattening out of everything, that this is the only way, is a little bit, again, it's frustrating.
People like Graham Oppie make arguments about the incompatibility of omniscience and free will, that if God created this world, if he chose this world instead of that world, then he makes it causally inevitable every single action that you were going to make. If he made a world where we were just electrons in love, then none of this would have happened. But by making us in this world, knowing exactly what's going to happen in the future, it makes all of those events inevitable, which means that they're all causally determined, which means that we have no free will. If you believe in an all good God or an all knowing God that made everything.
Well, have it your way.
Okay, cool. So then the free will theodicy fails.
Well, it fails for you. That doesn't mean you've disproved it. I mean,
you tried to make
the
argument.
Yes, you tried to make a case for a causally deterministic universe. I don't think there's any evidence for that at all.
Do you think that God could have created a different universe than the one that he created?
I have no idea.
Okay, so then there's going to be a double bind, right? So either he couldn't have done it, in which case he lacks a power, or he could have done it, in which case we don't have free will, because he chose this world instead of that world, making the events of this world instead of that world inevitable with his infallible knowledge.
I don't understand where you're headed.
Well, it just means that the free will defense fails. Like all this, like, and under your view,
if you want to have it fail, no problem. I don't know why it's relevant to the issue.
Do you acknowledge that under your view, free will doesn't exist?
No.
Oh, then do you want to respond to the argument?
You'll have to phrase it more clearly so that someone like me can understand it.
Yeah, got you. So God already knows in advance everything that's going to happen, which means that by making this world instead of that world, everything is inevitable, which means that God's act of causing this world instead of that world.
Inevitable doesn't mean determined.
It's causally inevitable if God chooses this world instead of that world.
Doesn't make it determined.
Causally inevitable means determined.
No, it doesn't.
Absolutely, yes, it does.
Well, have it your way.
Okay.
That's not the case.
If you've been voted out by the majority, please.
So first, well, let's just give our thoughts on this. I mean, I would actually kind of agree with Jordan there that causally inevitable does not necessarily mean it's determined. However, I guess you could make the argument, the Graham Oppie argument, that because God sanctions the world to be created and knows what's going to happen in it, then it is kind of causally determined. But I mean, then again, you have the Molinists, who I was, at least I had a foot in their camp, and I'd still say I have at least a bit of a foot in the camp of the Molinists that would say, well, if God greenlights the world to exist, where humans would do what they're naturally are going to do, right? He just picks the world where their free will is already compatible with what he wants to take place. Yes, there's no way that they can't not do what's going to happen in the future, but they don't know that. And they're going to do what they want to do anyway. So there's you could add that there. Now, again, I'm not saying there's not ways to throw that out as well, but even if you want to throw it all out, there's still other Christian options, and that's the open theist route. So there's, even if you throw all of that out, just go to the B theory of time, and you're going to be okay. Now, you may have some back end work you need to do with the scriptures, but that doesn't explode the Christian enterprise. So again, I don't see. I'd love to see a dialogue between an atheist and a Christian who are a little less fundamental like this, and see what that looks like, to where we could really get beyond these sorts of arguments, which I think are the more simplistic arguments of Christianity. I don't think this is where a majority of most of even the intellectual Christians are right now. I'm not saying that if you are a literalist, you're not an intellectual Christian, or if you believe in divine command theory, you're not an intellectual Christian. I'm not saying that. William Lane Craig's one of my favorite philosophers of all time. He holds to that. He holds to more of a literalist ethic. So I'm not making that claim. What I am saying is that there's a proud tradition of academics in Christianity who don't hold to these things. So there's more to be grappled with than everybody, an atheist always talking to a Christian and assuming they're a young earth creationist. That's just not the case anymore. And I wish the arguments from the other side were a little more evolved to reflect where Christians are today, and to make arguments against them. Like for the Christian who wants to say that, the land of the Canaan genocide is all spiritual and was written after the fact. Well, make an argument against that and say, no, it has to be literal. Okay, that could be an interesting conversation, but don't group everybody into the divine command theorist camp, or don't group everybody into the Calvinist camp. Don't group them into the easiest camp to make an argument against, is what I'd say, because that's just not going to be fruitful or productive. Again, I don't think this debate was fruitful or productive. And I'll point out again, even in the last kind of 2 minutes of what was presented by this gentleman here, it's just not convincing because it seems to be done in condescension and bad faith. And I get that maybe that's maybe not his fault, because that's the framing of the debate and how you have to get your points out. But if you want to get your points out to someone, putting an emphasis on the other person, putting an emphasis on caring and learning, right? It doesn't always have to be a zero-sum game. Any conversation, that's kind of what Jordan Peterson models that I admire. Any conversation you can learn something from. Don't be so convinced in your presuppositions. Listen to other people. They may have things you never heard before that may change your mind, or if they don't change your mind, at least they make you a better person. But if you come in with this point A, point B, point C, you know, and then also this doesn't make sense, and also that doesn't make, and if we look at it like, okay, all it seems like is that you are more interested in beating someone over the head with what you know, and you're not concerned with them. If you honestly believe someone's believing falsehoods, if you're an atheist who believes Christians are believing in falsehoods that are detrimental to their lives, if that's what you believe, and you think that their religion is causing harm to them and maybe causing harm to other people, well, then shouldn't you argue like you care about them? Do you care about the Christian person that you're trying to convince as an atheist, to convince them, look, there is no God, and the God you believe in is detrimental to you? And the same for Christians. Christians, do you care about the atheists you're talking to? Are you actively wanting, do you believe that what they believe in is detrimental to them? And that if they were in full fellowship with Christ, or in full fellowship with God, that it would be a greater, more spiritually rich life for them? If you honestly believe that, then you need to model your conversations after loving that person. If you're not doing that, we're getting conversations like this, which are not really doing anything for anybody except providing entertainment, and it's entertaining. But again, that's just my perspective on it. For all those people who have watched this, if you're an atheist, give your perspective. What do you think could have been done better in this conversation from either Jordan's perspective or from the atheist who was debating him? Or what you think, maybe how you would have debated Jordan, or maybe the points you make, or how you talk to other Christians, or if you're a Christian, how you talk to atheists, or how you talk to agnostics, or anyone who disagrees with you. I think we could really model better dialogue no matter where you come down, no matter what you believe in. Try to love one another. Just like Christ says, love each other, care about them. If you really want to move someone, if you believe what you believe and want to convince other people, start by loving that person, and then model your conversations after caring about them. So that's what I'd say. But anyway, it was a fun video, and guys, I'll see you in the next one.